And the causes, of course, vary from country to country, from culture to culture. And even within a particular territory, it can vary from what's happening in the coastal areas to what's happening in interior areas and so forth. Rural-urban divides also determine the reasons for child labor. We do have some repeated causes or factors which contribute to child labor. Among them, of course, poverty, low levels of educational attainment, lack of access to some of the basic services and social welfare elements that we often require to ensure a certain standard of living. High levels of insecurity in a country could also be a factor. And sometimes we say that they are both push and pull factors. Situations or factors that push persons to enter the world of work a lot more earlier than the international standards say they should, or there may be temptations which urge people to leave formal protective settings and enter other precarious settings. So if I had to rank them, I think the first thing we would address is, of course, poverty, because the lack of access to funding and other resources often drives families and eventually the children within those families to seek to undertake economic activities, to earn money, to get resources to cover just their basic needs, and then that could lead into exploitative situations. Right. So the other international labor conventions, we have Convention 182 and 138. Those are the key international conventions which establish certain guidelines that countries have signed on to or ratified. Once a country has ratified those conventions, it is often up to them to give effect to those requirements in their national laws. Child work. We're not saying that children can't undertake economic activity. They can. It's often seen as a good thing. It builds character. It teaches them resilience. It gives them, it teaches them responsibility. So chores are not a bad thing. Or, having a child who has an entrepreneurial spirit open a lemonade stand is not a bad thing. So child work is acceptable in many instances. And in fact, the international conventions even allow for children to work in family businesses up to a certain extent. Child labor is marked, especially one, by the length of time that a child is engaged in this particular activity. There are certain limits over, of course, there are national variations in law. But basically, a child should not be employed for more than 6 hours, doing a particular activity, whether it's cleaning a house or cleaning a yard or those kinds of things. In addition to the duration of time that they spend doing the activity, it's not supposed to impede them from having access to an education, having fun, socializing with their peers, resting, and of course enjoying all the other rights that are enshrined in the Convention on Child Rights, UN Convention on Child Rights. So child labor tends to be exploitative. It can be physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally damaging to a child. And ultimately, child labor is detrimental to the child's future development, not only to their present existence, but to their future development. And so when you examine a situation, you have to look for those kinds of conditions. And then we, of course, have the worst forms of child labor, the pornography, the prostitution, the use as drug couriers, the the ones that put them in serious risk of physical damage and mental damage. So we're not saying no to child work. It's good, it builds character, but child labor definitely is, when you examine it in various ways, can destroy a child's present and future. Okay, Max. There is no single solution. It takes coherent, cohesive action in multiple areas. One of the first things we have been looking at is educational participation in education. And for example, in Trinidad, we know that we tend to have universal primary education, possibly even universal secondary education, and a push to facilitate access to a large part of the population to tertiary education. However, retention of students in education is an issue which requires attention. So when we look at the number of school dropouts, especially at key transition points between primary school and secondary school, or maybe when they get to fourth form, fifth form, it tells us something. Why are they leaving school? Where are they going? What are they engaged in? Why are they engaged in that? And so if we were to be able to provide some more social support, follow-up investigation, then we might be able to, on one front, address or identify child labor when it's happening, and therefore be able to attack it. So I think it's not a single solution, but one of the strategies we can use to start reducing child labor is better monitoring, measuring, control of what's happening in our education systems. Okay, so if you look around, well, the first thing, I guess, between the officials at our level, international level, regional level, national level, is to promote local awareness, right? An understanding on the ground that sometimes a child may not be physically damaged or hurt or seem to have anything wrong with them, but they could be a victim of child abuse. You know, the child who is left alone from 4 p.m. till 12 a.m. in the morning to care for younger siblings is a child who is, in a situation of child labor. So the nuances. Firstly, we have to get the public to understand that child labor isn't only about children sitting at a sewing machine in a sweatshop making Nike shoes. That child labor has other, manifestations even in our society. And then as an individual, what you do is we become responsible for each other. We seek, to find out more about why maybe somebody in our community or a child in our community is on the street at 10 a.m. instead of in school. It means having a personal willingness to care for somebody else in our communities, even in the areas where we frequent. So that's one. And then, of course, in addition to that, we have to be willing and knowledgeable about how to inform the authorities who can take action. So, it's not about you don't want to mind people's business, but you may have to report to the social welfare department or to the child protection unit that, we've observed these children liming on the block 10 o'clock in the night, drinking rum and taking instructions from this fella on the block. Even if we have to do it, in anonymous conditions. But speaking up, speaking out, and reporting to the authorities responsible for enforcement is necessary. And we need, as we say, hands and feet on the ground.